Welcome everyone to our March 2025 Ask Mongo Q&A. I'm gonna jump right into this thing. I'm a little winded because I'm fresh off the exercise bike, so I'm a little winded. So I'm gonna try to get this thing as over with as quickly as possible. So uh, feel free to jump in when you can, but I want to get started because I know there's a lot of questions, and I really don't want to be here all night. Black Saiyan 97 has 5 questions. One, what's your thoughts on the current day Marvel Cinematic Universe? Well, I think it sucks. I haven't paid attention to much of anything since Endgame, but I have watched 3 movies. I've watched Doctor Strange, the second Doctor Strange. I watched Deadpool and Wolverine, and I've watched Captain America: Brave New World. I was unimpressed with. Oh, I saw Thor as well, but I'm not sure if Thor was after Endgame. At least I think it was. Uh, but I wasn't impressed with any of them really. I especially hated Thor. I really hated that. That was a really bad movie. That's like objectively bad. But Deadpool and Wolverine, I just didn't understand it. I thought it was stupid. But I don't watch any of the shows either, so I wasn't interested. I think my brother wanted to see Love and Thunder, which is why we watched it. If I remember correctly, we saw it in the theater, and I wanted to throw up. Jesus Christ. Two, my favorite Mob Deep songs. Ooh, uh, geez. Off the top of my head, you see, you got Getaway, you got Put Them in Their Place. Havoc is such a great producer. Give Up the Goods. Um, geez, you could just pretty much go with the whole Infamous album. Drop a gem on them, which was supposedly the Tupac disc, but drop a gem on them. Clearly, I was a big fan of The Quiet Storm. I'm not a huge Mob Deep fan, um, but the Infamous is it's a classic. It's like without a doubt a classic album. Outside of the Infamous, I like Burn too. I like Burn. Um, there's quite a few. I know Havoc produced the beat that goes to out with the 50 Cent diss record "I Love New York" or "I Run New York." I don't remember what the original song was called though, but I do remember. I think it was called Cobra, if I remember correctly. But those are some of my favorite Mobb Deep tracks. Um, but I do like Mobb Deep, big fan. Three, when R-Truth turned heel in 2011, do you think he should have won the world title at that time, or was he just filler for Cena? I think he was filler, clearly. Um, it seemed like he became comedic right before the title match, too. I think didn't he come out at one point in time dressed as a Confederate soldier or something like that? Like there was some really weird stuff that was going on. If he was taken super seriously, maybe. But I think he went back to kind of being silly right after that. So it kind of put himself in the filler mode. Four, do you have any pet peeves on current day manga or anime, or just manga and anime in general? Um, I fall into this trap a lot, which is a shame because I wish it wouldn't exist. But when they draw female characters to look young, but they're really old, I absolutely hate that. There is a relatively good manga that came out within the last couple of years called Momo the Blood Taker. And of course, one of the characters is a vampire. She's like thousands of years old, but she looks like she's 12. And it's such a weird thing that they do when they put, and it wasn't too sexualized, but there were, times where she was topless in the manga. And I would be like, what the hell are you doing? Like if somebody was to see this out of context, they think it was a little girl naked. Why put people in that position? I hate it so much. That's one of the things that makes me. That's why I started. I'll go to the manga decks sometimes before I buy it, just to see what it looks like and everything. So there's no weirdness like that in there. I was already like I think 3 or 4 books in before that thing had even happened. So I was like, I'm also going to push through. And it didn't happen a lot. But I was like, I got to push through this. I don't like it. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm not a big fan of isekai. Some of the ridiculous. Um, I'm a teacher in a demon world kind of stuff. I get real picky about that kind of stuff. Like sometimes the isekais are okay, but it has dominated the manga and anime scene for a long time, and I'm not really a huge fan of it. Like I love Konosuba, but a lot of the other isekai I'm not really feeling. 5. Do you have hopes for that James Gunn Superman movie? I think after that trailer, uh, my hopes went down. I think there needs to be more Superman in your Superman movie, and I think Superman should be the focus. So I don't know what we got Green Lanterns in it for, and all that other stuff. I don't know what they're doing, but apparently they went back to the drawing board because I haven't heard or seen anything about that movie since that trailer dropped. So apparently they're about to reshoot that joint. DeAndre Dukes, he has 3 questions. He says, 1, what is reaching your breaking point in wrestling? That's a good question because I think the excessively long matches is really getting on my nerves, specifically between people that I don't care about. That's starting to wear on me a lot. Um, how how boring everybody is, and I don't mean like I mean like they're not characters. Their personas don't really jump off the screen. Everybody wants to be too normal, or they want to be too wacky. Like Danhausen, too wacky. Um, Harley Cameron, too wacky. You know, you can be wacky and a little over the top without being, ridiculous. Like I do like the new generation era. I'm a big fan, actually. But that's because I grew up on it. I have a soft spot for Doink and how over the top Doink and stuff like that is. But if I was 23 or 24 when that stuff was happening, I'd have been pissed. I would have hated it. And also the excessive triple threat matches. Hey, Dennis Kane jumped right in. He nailed it. The excessive multi-man matches and the excessive amount of tournaments and fatal four ways, really boring booking stuff. Yeah, I'm kind of sick of that shit. I'm kind of tired of that. Um, also, yeah, I think that's enough. 2, have I seen any good movies lately? Hmm. That's a good question because the only movie I've really watched recently has been The Man with the Golden Gun. I watched that again, but I've seen that before. So other than that, have I seen any new good movies? Probably not. Um, I've only watched 2 new movies within the last 3 or 4 months. I watched Love Hurts and I watched Captain America: Brave New World, and I didn't really like either one of them. Love Hurts had me for a second because I thought it was like a love letter to Jackie Chan movies, and it turned out to be utter horseshit. And I'm like, I don't want to watch this no more. I don't want to watch this no more. So I didn't. I finished it, but I don't suggest anybody else watch it. But the action scenes are pretty good, at least. 3, anything worth participating in 2025? Well, yes. There's probably going to be some really cool cons and concerts. I do want to go to that Wu Tang Run the Jewels concert that's going to be happening this year, mainly because I'm hearing it might be Wu Tang's last run. So I'm very excited for that. But there's, of course, issues with money and times are tough. I got till July, I think, so I should be able to save up enough money to get a couple of tickets for them. Big Armada has it's not like he got a couple of paragraphs here, but there's some questions in here somewhere. Um, Big Armada says, I remember in a past live stream you mentioned reading history books predating the 1980s when it came to things like World War II, slavery, abolition, and the Civil War. They give you a fuller scope of the times back then. Can you tell us what those books are? Okay, I could do that. Typically, I read Benjamin Quarles, The Negro in the Making of America. I don't know when that book came out, but I'm pretty sure it was the 60s. Benjamin Quarles, Black Abolitionists, also came out in the 60s. Eugene Genovese, The World the Slaveholders Made, that came out in 1969, if I remember correctly. I got it right here too, by the way. I think it came out in 1969. He also, LB Eugene Genovese, he wrote a book called The Political Economy of Slavery, which is another pretty good book. I was recently reading, E. Franklin Frazier. It wasn't a book. Well, it was kind of a book, but it was on the Negro family. It came out in like 1939. And it's out of print. So I got it from archive, if I remember correctly, or maybe I got a PDF. But it was quoted in the Patrick Moynihan report on the Negro family. And a lot of people they quote that, but they didn't actually read it. And E. Franklin Frazier's, his thesis on, well, I wouldn't say the entire thesis because the goddamn thing is like 400 pages. But the one of the things he mentioned was urbanization. And one day I'm gonna talk about that, how urbanization changed the Black family. So those are 4 or 5 right there. Also, you could read things that were written by people who lived at the time, like right after slavery. So things like during Reconstruction. So like Booker T. Washington, my larger education. You could that would help you out. Even though he's a communist, but W.E.B. Du Bois, that stuff is usually pretty prescient of the time that it is written in. And of course, you can, if you have a pretty agile mind, you can pretty much put things where it needs to be as you're reading that stuff. But it opens your mind up to how different things can be and how different people perceive history before the woke mind virus absolutely positively changed everything. Because a lot of these people are Marxists, like Eugene Genovese. He's arguing for a Marxist interpretation of history. But his Marxist interpretation of history is mostly class-based history, not the socialist, communist agitation garbage you read today, but slaves as a social class, slave owners as a social class, not as a black people versus white people gimmick, but as if you look at slaveholders as a social class across different slave economies, what makes America different from what Britain was doing? What makes Britain and America different from what Spain and Portugal were doing? That kind of stuff. It really opens your mind up to understanding American slavery, things like the Civil War, all that kind of stuff. It opens your minds up even more. And so when I say, and I'm going to maintain, like states' rights is an issue when it comes to the Civil War, I know it was economic as well. I'm not denying that. And obviously slavery is one of the issues. When you say something like that, you have to take into account, they don't take into account that part of states' rights was the states' rights to have free Negroes in their state. That's another thing that you never hear about that, because before the Civil War, that was an issue. When the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, because slaves were running away and running to the free states, so they passed the Fugitive Slave Act, and they forced free states to turn over slaves, well, former slaves, runaways, and the states fought it in court and ended up losing. But it's that kind of thing that ended up being a states' rights issue. Do you have the right to circumvent the federal government? Time and time again, it has said no. And then the Civil War was the exclamation point on that. But again, that's what I mean by you read things that come before this era. Because if you talk about the Civil War, for anybody who's just read books from like 1990 to today, it's all bullshit. It's all going to be slavery this and slavery that, without taking into account that there were states that never had legal slavery. There were states that where slavery was still an issue, even though it was legal or even though it was illegal. Then you had places like Kansas where it was an issue. They did a they had it's called Bleeding Kansas, where the state itself was going to decide about whether it was going to be a free state or a slave state. And you had people from both states coming into Kansas and voting to get to for whether Kansas is going to be a slave state or a free state. But that's, all these little intricacies that people don't talk about when you talk about slavery and the Civil War and shit. His second part says also there are people who or podcasts online like Daryl Cooper or Thomas Sowell that also help give a fuller view of these historical events, as opposed to things like Roots or the transatlantic slave trade and slavery in the Americas. Yes, you should. I would suggest Daryl Cooper is he's good, but he's more of a storyteller. He compiles history and from different books and stuff, and basically puts it in a narrative. But that's pretty much the same thing hardcore history does. Same thing of Fall of Civilizations. They do the same thing. But you have to be a fan of like ancient history to really get involved with those guys. Daryl Cooper's stuff is more, I think, as far as the furthest he went back is World War II. I don't think he's gone back to like slavery and all that kind of stuff. But he gets harangued quite a bit for his World War II and Hitler coverage. But yeah, I would suggest if you're interested in World War II, Tick History on YouTube. He is one of the more preeminent Nazi guys. Like, he really studied everything about the Nazis, from their economy to their philosophy to their religion to how they fought in the war, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, he's probably a really good option. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any more. Like, that one really jumps out at me. If there's any other ones, I'll probably let you know. 305 Johnny has 5 questions. Have you ever dreamed of being a farmer one time? A farmer? Man, I'll tell you this. No, I never dreamed of being a farmer. But I did do some planting. I had to plant some plants and shit in the rain when I was in Job Corps. That put me off farming. I didn't want to do nothing to do with the grass, the ground, the plants, or anything like that. After that, I wasn't interested no more. I was miserable doing that. 2, do you agree that Donald Trump should pardon Derek Chauvin? Ooh, that's a good question. See, let's talk about this. Do I think he should be pardoned? If Donald Trump was to pardon him, it wouldn't do anything but piss people off. Do I think Donald Trump will? Probably on his last day in office. He'll probably do it. I don't think Derek Chauvin got a fair trial. I will say that. I think that Derek Chauvin, much like Weinstein, much like Bill Cosby, they may have been guilty, but they did not get a fair trial. And you have to be honest about that sort of thing. Too many people have lied and said that the technique that Derek Chauvin was using was not taught to them. Those people got on the stand and flat out fucking lied. And there were manuals that proved that, they were being taught that technique. He had used it previously, so they knew that he was doing that stuff before. There's even video and photos of him using that knee on the neck technique before. And they just lied. They basically threw the guy under the bus for political expediency. And I don't think that's fair. If Trump were to pardon him, it wouldn't do anything because he still has all the state charges. So, tough. But I don't think he got a fair trial at all. So if you think that he should be pardoned, I think he probably will get pardoned, but it'll probably be like on Trump's last day in office. I don't think it'll do him any good anyway. But I think he got railroaded for sure. If he'd have got a fair trial, he might have got off. And I'm not even talking about the autopsy with the drugs in the system and all that stuff. It's just that there was so much political there were politicians from outside of that state influencing the jury and influencing the judge. It just wasn't fair. Now, there is something to be said that a case that high profile, there were not anywhere on planet Earth that you could go where he would have gotten a fair trial. And I think that with the way social media is now, you probably have to start having, I don't want to say secret trials, but trials where there's a gag order on all of the attorneys, and there are no reporters or anyone allowed in the in the courtroom and that sort of thing, in order to protect the defendant's rights. Because as it is right now, the defendants in higher profile cases are just going to get railroaded. I'm surprised that what happened in the Trayvon Martin situation, if we're being honest. 3, what is your top 10 Bone Thug songs? Oh my goodness. Shots to the Double Glock, No Surrender, East 99 Eternal, shit. The intro to East 99 Eternal. All the Way, which is on Thug World Order. If I Fall, which is on Thug World Order. Ooh, it's nut cutting time now. Obviously, The Crossroads is one of my favorites. Days of Our Lives. I think I got 2 more. Days of Our Lives might be my favorite Bone Thug song, by the way. Notorious Thugs, and I gotta put Notorious Thugs on there, right? And I only got one more. One more. For the Love of Money. Okay, so that's 10. How do you? His fourth question: how do you describe toxic femininity? Well, I think when women can generate excessive sympathy, even when you remove agency from women, and they get excessive amounts of sympathy. Case in point, everybody is sympathetic towards a woman who is abused, but then they start putting all these weird twists on abuse. Then there's the financial abuse of you not wanting to give her money, emotional abuse, emotional cheating, all these sorts of things, and you're kind of like, what? The ability to withdraw consent after sex, which is strange. The idea that no matter what her age is, um, she cannot make her own decisions. These sorts of things is paternalistic, and I think that a lot of women take advantage of that. When they do things like bruise their own bodies and then call police and say, "Oh no," and that relational aggression is number one thing when it comes to toxic femininity. The ability to call a brother, a cousin, a boyfriend, the police, or somebody, and claim that you were abused, and they just believe it without question, without doing any sort of investigation. They just believe it, and they start um, engaging usually in violence against the boyfriend, baby daddy, or whatever. So because women know they can do that, they do it quite often. 5, have you ever got to check out this YouTuber called Aquarius Wave? Never heard of him. Terra War. Hey Mongo, what's up, Terra War? Salute thee. What's your favorite wrestling storyline ever? The Mega Powers exploding. Easily. Without question. The Mega Powers exploding. I wasn't old enough to fully understand it, but I just remember the magic around it. But I wasn't old enough to fully understand it at the time. Again, I started watching wrestling at, 6 years old. I know the Mega Powers was before that, but I was around, but I really didn't start paying attention until 1990. And I think the Mega Powers had a lot to do with me really locking in and being a wrestling fan. His second question: what do you think wrestling will look like in 50 years if it still exists? I think it will always exist, but I think it's going to be more like the circus, where you know, it's kind of like that now, but I think it's going to be purely a TV show, and there will not be any house shows. It's going to be a very limited roster, maybe about 50 to 60 people. You know, these 200-person rosters is probably going to be gone. I think the WWE will still be there. It'll probably be much smaller. I think they're going to hit a bubble eventually and not be able to pull up from under it. I don't know if AEW will still be there. I'm pretty sure WWE will still be there. And I'm pretty sure the Japanese promotions will still be there. And I'm pretty sure at least CMLL will still be there from Mexico. Um, I would be surprised if it's bigger and better in 50 years than it is now. You know, I'll just be surprised if that's the case. 3, if all electronic devices disappear, what would entertain humans the most? Each other. I think if we got rid of electronical devices, we just go back to talking to each other and reading magazines and books. You know, and then you may see the reviving of local art and culture. Like people used to go to comedy shows and they used to join clubs and things like that so they can socialize. Now people socialize online, so they don't need to do that stuff anymore. So now you have fewer comedians than you probably ever had, fewer actors than you probably ever had, fewer musicians, professional musicians, because there used to be a time where a guy could just be a local musician, you know. So I mean, you can still be a local musician, but I'm just saying, like, there's not a lot of places for this guy to work now because a lot of the social clubs and stuff are gone. Mr. VXG has a question. It says, "What is your favorite album cover?" Oh, that's a good one. I want to say Illmatic. I think Illmatic is a really dope album cover. So I think that one was fair. I also I'm kind of partial to I think Illmatic might just be it. Yeah, Illmatic is probably my favorite album cover. Top Dog has, I think, 5 questions. He's 4. He says top 5 pay-per-views of the new generation era. Oof. Okay. Mind Games, In Your House. What was this? Um, In Your House. Buried Alive. Undertaker and Mankind also has Sid and Vader. Really fun. Let's see. What else? SummerSlam 1996. I love SummerSlam 96. Good event. Undertaker versus Mankind. Sid versus the British Bulldog. Owen Hart versus Savio Vega was the opener. The main event was solid, you know, with Shawn and Vader. So that's 3. Good Friends, Better Enemies. That's 4. And Bad Blood. Bad Blood 97. I think technically that might be still added. That might be like one of the first Attitude Era pay-per-views, really. Bad Blood 97. So if you want to say Bad Blood 97 is a Attitude Era pay-per-view, so that one wouldn't count. Then I'll have to go back to 96. And I'll probably say one of my favorite events is I want to say WrestleMania 12. I like WrestleMania 12, but the main event is a little long. I don't think I have the patience to sit through that main event anymore. I do like the February show, Shawn and Owen, Razor and 1-2-3 Kid, Diesel and Brett in a cage match. Yeah, let's go with that. February 96. I think it's called Rage in the Cage or whatever the fuck. Top Dog has another question. Why aren't you a fan of the Attitude Era like everyone else? It's hard to say because I I I turned 16 in 2000. So I've been watching wrestling for 10 solid years at that point. And I've seen a lot, and there was a lot going on. Something happened in 1999, and I was just kind of like, I don't really want to watch this stuff anymore. And it's hard to say what it was because I can't think of what it could have possibly been. Um, but I didn't enjoy it as much as everybody else. You know, to me, I think a lot of the undercard talent were not up to snuff. I know it got better in 2000. Like I quit right before Benoit and Dean Malenko and all those guys came in. But like sitting through the absurd amount of Viscera and Midian and at the time Big Boss Man and Al Snow and Hardcore Holly and Crash Holly and all the hardcore title shit. It's like I hate all that stuff today. Like I really can't stand any of it today. Um, so I'm not really just not a big fan of it. Even though I do like the stuff at the top. I do like Undertaker and Steve Austin and The Rock. I do like some of the tag team stuff. But like a lot of the mid card was a mess. It was a disaster, bro. I can't stand none of that shit. 3. His third question. Favorite wrestling legends pre-Hogan era. Oh. Big fan of Bruno. Big fan of Stan Hansen. Watch some of his stuff from the 70s. Also Dusty. Big fan of Superstar Billy Graham. Mad Dog Vachon. Some of the stuff from the AWA was really good. His tag team matches with his brother against the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser. I'm also a big fan of Dick the Bruiser too. So yeah, I think that would be pre-Hogan, right? So that would be pre-80, 83 or something. But I guess you could put the Junkyard Dog on there too. Ted DiBiase from that era was also pretty good in Mid-South. You're talking about black and white footage now, brother. His fourth question: what time period was prime Ric Flair? Oh my goodness. Some people would say early 80s, and I think that might have been his physical peak when he was going out there going hour with everybody. I think that was it. Early 80s Flair or early 80s Flair from like 80 to 86 maybe. He was undoubtedly the best wrestler in the world at that point in time. I think only Steamboat and Savage could see him by 85 or 86. He was easily the best wrestler in the world at that point. Mr. VXG is back. Have you had any celebrity encounters? If so, what was your most memorable one? If not, who would you like to meet? Well, I will say this. I believe, I think I told you guys before, when I was doing AmeriCorps, I was supposed to be on BET. And they brought cameras and they had a production team and they brought this little spitfire of a director from Brooklyn and everybody was mad at her. She got a earful. She was a black girl too. She was like super annoying. But that's where you had, I believe it was Yo-Yo. She was hosting a TV show and she never came out of her trailer. She came out of her trailer to shoot her scenes, but that was it. And she went back in. That was it. She didn't do anything else. So I was like, that sucks. Because we were doing like some kind of community gardening thing, and she was supposed to be out there helping. That's what the show was about. But she didn't do anything. She went out there like an old lady and helped lift it one thing or two things here and there, but she didn't do shit else. Like that was it. And I never did see that it made air. I don't know if it made air or not. I don't even remember what the name of the show was. But it was like a really small BET show. And whatever. Did I meet any other celebrities? I met Mike Duggan, the mayor of Detroit. I met him at AmeriCorps as well. We did a Martin Luther King march through a neighborhood, the purpose of which was for domestic violence or something to that effect. I just shook his hand. I didn't vote for the fucking guy. I shook his hand though. I was like, "Hey, it's the mayor." Shake his hand. That's it. Whatever. I ain't about he brown nosed with some people. I ain't have time for it. I was eating pizza or chicken or some shit afterwards. I was burnt out. AmeriCorps used to kick my ass. It was fulfilling work, but I used to kick my ass. Mr. VXG has another question. How would you have ended the Bloodline storyline? Rock versus Roman, where the Rock puts the Ulafala around Roman's neck and lifts his arm again, this time to great applause. Darren Miles has 6 questions. What are your thoughts on the special guest Monday Night Raw episodes in the late 2000s? I honestly don't remember any of them. Like the gimmick era is such a blur. Like the special guest host era and the laptop general manager era. I can't tell you much about anything from those eras, man. It was a blur. I'm pretty sure I watched all of that stuff. I hated a lot of it. But the big events usually paid off, at least SummerSlam and WrestleMania and stuff. Usually those did okay, but the week to week shows, oof, tough. I mean, it's just tough to have a 3-hour wrestling show in general. 2, what are your thoughts on WrestleMania 11? One of the worst WrestleManias. Just a really bad show. Classically bad. Jacob and Eli Blue versus Luger and British Bulldog. Jacob and Eli Blue. Jesus Christ. That's so bad. King Kong Bundy, who was washed as fuck at the time, versus The Undertaker. Shawn and Diesel was fine. And then on the main event, you had Lawrence Taylor versus Bam Bam Bigelow. And then on the undercard, you had Bret Hart versus Bob Backlund. And it should have been somebody else. I mean, I get it that they wanted to close up the Bret Bob Backlund story. I wish they'd have closed it up at the Rumble, though, and then let Bret do something else for WrestleMania, because that was a mistake. WrestleMania 11 is not good. Is it still in my top 5 worst WrestleManias? Even though I got the nostalgia of, seeing it on pay-per-view for the first time and all that, yeah, it's still up there as one of my least favorite WrestleManias of all time. It's got to be top 5. 3, how would you write the ending of Naruto? I would have gotten rid of anything that says aliens. Anything that has to do with aliens, I would have gotten rid of it. Anything that cut Madara from being the main boss, I would have gotten rid of it. And him being defeated would have been the end of the show. I don't like, and anime and manga has a history of doing this, of the final boss or the final villain just being a tool of some other unknown final boss or final villain. It has never been more frustrating than Naruto and Inuyasha. Super annoying. Super, super, super fucking annoying. Because they built up these villains over hundreds and hundreds of episodes. And then you cut them off because the real villain is the Shikon Jewel. It's a living, breathing thing that controls people. And they never mentioned that shit before. Now I'm like, get the fuck out of here, okay? And I like Inuyasha, but that's a cop out, and I can't stand it. I don't know why the Japanese do that so much. Stop doing it. 4, do you have any advice on how to deal with children? I'll be working as a behavioral technician in a few days. Oh yes, I did that. I did that. I used to work in a group home. So, depending on the age group, what you want to do is you want to be fun but fair. You want to be fun, firm, and fair. That's the 3 things you want to do. Always have something fun for them to do. and genuinely enjoy spending time with them. If they have problems reading, read with them. They have problems, doing math or whatever, help. That's how you build trust, then you can build respect. Always be fair. Don't lie to them if you can't avoid it, because a lot of people are going to tell them a lot of things that are not going to be true. Be as fair as you can possibly be with them. If you fuck up, apologize, and then expect them to apologize. Also, do not hold grudges. Again, that's another thing about fairness. If a kid does something stupid, like one time a kid stole my cell phone, right? And I got pissed off. I threatened to kick the ass of any kid who had my fucking phone. He wanted to fight me, so he's like, I got your phone right here. So I took my phone back, and he said, you gonna beat my ass? You gonna beat my ass? I was like, nope. I went back later, and I told him, like, you know what? I was wrong for making that threat. My bad. I'm sorry. And then he apologized for stealing my phone, and then that was it. And I didn't hold any grudges. I didn't let him steal my phone again. I was careful about that. But again, if a kid does something, a kid pulled a knife on me once when I was working at Wolverine. You know, and I had to get over it. Like that's one of the things that kind of happens when you're working with troubled youth. They do things, they say things. Sometimes they're testing you, um, but you have to be fun, meaning that if you're cool, then the other kids who are bullies will look out for you. If you're firm and you set boundaries for you and them, then that fairness come in, okay? Because then they know, okay, I'm fucking up or whatever. But it depends on the age group of the kids you're going to be dealing with. If you're going to be dealing with teenagers, just be prepared to have your manhood tested. All right, because that's what they all about. It's all macho, balls out, dumb shit. It don't get into any tug of wars, for respect, power, or anything like that. At that point, realize it's about your ego. Disengage. If you see a kid trying to goad you into a fight or trying to goad you into an argument, disengage. You know, and then pull them aside later. I had to do that so many times. Usually they will buckle if you pull them aside later and say, look, I don't know what's going on with you, but I don't play that. Don't do this. Don't do that. Yada, yada, yada. And then make sure to reestablish the relationship after you set your boundaries. It's that simple. Like that's the number one thing you need to realize. If things are going to fall apart, don't hold any grudges, but reset your boundaries. Because if the kid doesn't apologize, and he should, because most of the time they do. But let's say that he don't. Still don't hold it against him. But you need to say what you need to say. Just say it off to the side where he won't be embarrassed and you won't get involved with any tugs of war because that's what it's about. It's about ego. You know, I've had kids threaten me a lot. And like I said, a kid pulled a knife. That was the only time I really got like physical with a kid, like really physical. Is when a kid was choking another one and when that kid pulled a knife on me. Other than that, I can handle most issues non-verbally. I mean verbally, really. Also, if you're working in a group home or something like that, you have to be attentive to the kids when they're quiet. That's a big issue. Um, we had a kid commit suicide because nobody was checking on him. Nobody paid attention. So that was that was a really bad time. I can tell you that. But a lot of that was because when you're in behavioral tech or whatever, you get burned out dealing with all these personalities, and you know you lose track of people, you lose track of things, and it's just an unfortunate situation that occurred. But there was often times where you'll see a kid acting out, and he'll be sitting somewhere by himself, even if he's not in your group and you're not responsible for him. This is part of building trust and building a rapport. Just take a knee and say, "Man, what's going on? What's happening?" Yada yada yada. and build that rapport. Let them talk. You know, try to have no judgment. You're gonna judge for sure, but you know we all are human beings. But limit that. You know, and then if you can, if you think you're good enough at advising and correcting behavior, go for it. You know, you say, look, I appreciate that you're upset. Thanks for talking to me, but I appreciate you're upset. But you can't be slamming doors. You can't be making threats because that makes things worse for you. You know, but the more you learn about the rules of the facility and what you can and can't do and all that kind of stuff, you will be able to um, set boundaries, say what you can say, and all that stuff. But I did that for 6 to 8 months or whatever, and then I walked out. I quit. Legit. I was burnt out on that shit. 5. How come nobody whooped Ole Anderson's ass for all the racist stuff he said? And how come Ernie Ladd let Ali call him the N-word? Well, he was usually the boss, I would imagine. And plus, back in those days, that kind of shit happened all the time. You know, I think a lot of those guys they had composure. You know, nowadays people flip out about stuff like that, but back then, I think they had a little bit more composure. They realized the people that they were working with were not always fans of them, you know, being black or whatever. And I'm pretty sure that, you know, the gays and the Puerto Ricans and all of them had the same thing. Um, but if you need the guy for work, I would imagine you're just going to put up with it to a degree. But I'm pretty sure if he did say that he wasn't going to be too abusive, because Ernie Ladd was probably a guy who kind of, you know, well, Ernie Ladd was kind of old. It depends on. I don't remember when this happened. I don't know like what year it was, but it might have been a situation where Ole Anderson was figured into the office, or he was close to the booker, or something like that. 6. How come Big Nose Triple H let Sexy Red on NXT when she never even tweeted about it? And how come WWE in general tries so hard to cater to people who don't care? I think she did tweet about NXT. I think she promoted being on NXT. Um, she's not tweeting about it now, but she mentioned that she might be at WrestleMania this year. You know, she did TikToks with Shawn Michaels and all that kind of stuff. She did a lot of stuff when she was on that show. Um, so I'm not sure that's the case, but I do think that they are catering to people who are just there to be on TV and to shill a product. Which, to be honest, Sexy Red is not good at anything, so whatever. But she might pop up at WrestleMania this year. I wouldn't be surprised. Um, the M Studios has 6 or 7 questions. Because aside from the Attitude Era, was there any other point in time you almost stopped watching wrestling? Uh, yes. It was probably 2011, 2012, 2013. I just wasn't a fan of the product. Um, I pushed through it. You know, like those are not great times. You know, there's a lot of a cavalcade of things that occurred at that time, but that's when I realized that the days of me sitting back and enjoying an entire episode of Monday Night Raw is that's not going to happen. You know, like I can't tell you the last time I enjoyed a complete wrestling show from beginning to end. Like maybe Roadblock from NXT might be the most recent show that I, you know, loved from beginning to end. But back when I was a kid, I used to love shows all the time. Even if the wrestling wasn't good, I just liked watching the show. Now, you know, since 2010, since maybe even since like 2008, I've kind of tolerated wrestling. You know, like for me, and I used to tell people this all the time, and I still think it's true today. I watch wrestling because it's better than anything else that's on TV. You know, 8 o'clock on a Monday. What else is better than Raw? If maybe you like football, you know, maybe that's your thing. Okay, but there ain't nothing else better on a Monday than a wrestling show. And you have to sit through the bad stuff to see some of the good stuff sometimes. And sometimes the good stuff, if there's enough of it, it'll keep you sustained for a while. And that's kind of what keeps me going is I like wrestling, even when it's not the best. Because if the show is not great, then it's just a not great show. There'll be other shows. Like if Raw sucks this week, which it did, I just say, well, there's always next week. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's always next week, and I don't have to pay for it. So it don't like. I think that has had a lot to do with it. If wrestling was like comic books, and I had to physically go and buy it every single month or every single week, I probably would have quit a long time ago. But because all I had to do was turn my TV on, then at 11 o'clock, either I'm good with the show or the show sucked. Either way, I'm back next week because it didn't cost me anything. so, so they make it easy for you. So but I even when times are bad, I have fun watching the show. And I stopped watching it when I wasn't having fun watching it anymore. And I started watching it again when I started having fun watching it again. It took for me to have that break in order to really appreciate it, I think. Second question. Is it a fair assessment that most of the top baby faces in WWE, despite being over, they aren't interesting characters? That is true because Triple H, he's trying to push conflict, which is good. And it's one of the things I talked about when it comes to AEW, sometimes the indies, is they don't really drive home conflict. But part of the issue is you see time and time again people wanting to give wrestling credit. Oh, they're acting like real people on TV. They're acting like real people. I don't want to watch real people, right? Like I want to watch characters. The Sopranos, they didn't act like real people. They were fucking gangsters. Gangsters aren't normal people. You know what I'm saying? Like TV, nobody wants to watch regular Joe Schmo in fucking jeans, fake fight in the ring. Nobody wants to watch that stuff. I want to watch characters interact. You know, this idea that real people do certain things. It's like you don't need to do that. You can have characters. I don't. It's so frustrating because people think that these people are interesting and they're not. Most wrestlers, especially nowadays, they have no fucking life experience. They never done anything. They're gym rats who watched wrestling as a kid, and that's it. It's like these are not war veterans and former football players and people who led interesting lives. Most of those people they've been run out of the business, or those people aren't hanging around anymore. A lot of them are like super fans of like the 2020s and all that kind of stuff, WWE. And you're like, okay, that's nice and all, but like it's cool that I heard that Montez Ford was in the military. They don't use that at all. The fact that he was in the military. That should Lashley, I always talked about that too. He was the guy who was in the military. Would have been cool for them to use something like that in his character. I'm not saying that he has to be G.I. Bro. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there should be storylines and elements that flesh that kind of stuff out, that you can bring his real life into the story. And this is what, when you had things like Miro and Lana having relationship troubles, like that was a real life storyline, but it was played up for the cameras. And of course it was, exaggerated because it's pro wrestling. But you had a situation where a husband and a wife were having issues, and the wife is, hanging around with this gigantic black dude. It's so ridiculous when you think about it. And that's why I found it entertaining. The idea that Charlotte and Lacey Evans, as much as people hated that story, I thought it was interesting because I've always had the question in my mind that if your daddy was Hugh Hefner, how would you feel? Like that's a deep human question. If your dad was like an old pimp who was delusional and thought he still got it, how would you react? Like, what would your life be like? Those are the kinds of things that I would be interested in, because those are the kind of things you could write a novel about, you know? And I would always think about that. And they see, and you can tell people are interested in that kind of stuff because they will ultimately do like a podcast or something saying, hey, my daddy was somebody special or something like that. What was it like being the son or daughter of this special person? And you take Ric Flair, who is a character, you know, and you put him in a situation where he's trying to dilly-dally with this young girl, and his daughter is about the same age as that girl, or maybe even a little bit older. And you basically put him in this uncomfortable situation. But you could have had a good human story behind it. You know, they were playing it for cartoon shit, which is what WWE does. But you could have told a really good story. Like if somebody did a movie with your dad being 70 some odd years old, he went out and got a 30-year-old girlfriend. Nobody would have thought that movie was gross or weird or anything like that. They'd have said, oh, that's interesting. You know, what would you do in that kind of situation? And wrestling can ask those questions. Like, what would you do if, you know, your dad had a young fling that worked with you in the same place? Your dad is banging one of your coworkers. Like, how gross and weird is that? You know, like that's an interesting story that you can play with. Unfortunately, most people are not mature enough to handle that sort of stuff. And it's crazy because this is a PG product, but they're not mature enough to handle those kinds of stories. And that's why he didn't like it. You know, Ric Flair is gross. This whole thing is a perverted. It's like, man, you watch movies all the time where old motherfuckers are hooking up with young chicks. You know, drug dealers are turning out girls who work at the bank. You know, all kinds of weird stuff. And the whole thing is to look at as long as it's not like pedophilia or something that's completely over the top, like Triple H humping a corpse, like that kind of stuff is too far over the line. You know, what would you do if you got exposed to being, you know, a necrophiliac? Nobody wants to answer that question, and nobody wants to deal with that. So no. But what Ric Flair and Charlotte and Lacey Evans were doing, there's people out there doing that. I had cousins whose daddy was, he's a bootlegger and a pimp, and they got his daddy got a girlfriend that's around the same age as his sons. Like what's that about? Like I've never been in that situation, so I don't know how to react to that. Like, but it's a situation where people are in those situations. So I think that you need their definition of realism needs to encompass even sometimes things that are surreal, because the surreal actually happens, and that's what makes good TV. That's why you have like My 600-Pound Life and all that kind of stuff, because it's surreal that somebody would allow themselves to become 900 pounds, or that somebody would be a hoarder and live in a place full of moldy books and moldy 2-year-old pizza boxes and stuff like that. It's surreal. Like these baddie shows and all that stuff's nowhere near realistic. And people watch the shit. Nobody wants to watch boring people on television. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I'm not going to pretend to understand it. People want to see characters. His third question. I know that you hate triple threat matches, but do you think there is a way where doing a triple threat match is effective when it comes to big storylines or feuds? Well, if you're going to do a triple threat match, there should be a reason why it's a triple threat match. And it should be a good, convincing reason why it's a triple threat match. In most situations, you should do something to eliminate one of the options. So let's say you got what happened with Ricochet and Speedball Mike Bailey. you have more than enough time to say, okay, it's a double pin. So Speedball's got to wrestle Ricochet, and we got to have a winner. Like, it's not like you don't have time. Like, if you absolutely do not have time to to decide which one of them is going to wrestle for the belt, then maybe a triple threat match would make sense. But if you have more than enough time to decide that, you have 4 shows or whatever that you could have done that match on, then it doesn't make sense why you would just agree to a triple threat match. It doesn't stand to reason. A Money in the Bank situation where one party forces a triple threat situation might make sense. Um, so something like that. But most other times, it really just proves that the booker doesn't know to pull one of the people out of the match. You know, it's usually better storytelling to pull somebody anyway and then save them for later, or at least use them as a person who interrupts the match. Like, think about if WrestleMania 14's main event, not 14, but 13, was, instead of it being Sid versus Undertaker, it was Sid versus Undertaker versus Bret Hart. Because, Vince, didn't think Sid and Undertaker could handle it by themselves. They're like, okay, then you wouldn't have got Bret Hart versus Steve Austin because he'd have been in that stupid triple threat match. You know? So, and the feud was booked that these guys were interlinked, going all the way back to the Royal Rumble, right? When where Steve Austin threw Bret out and then threw out Undertaker, that led to the Final Four where Steve Austin was eliminated, and then he helped Bret win. Kind of, it was inadvertent, and then he cost Bret the title the very next night by hitting him in the head with a chair. So Sid was the champion, and Undertaker became the number one contender. So then it was Sid and Undertaker. But what if Bret says, "Well, I was the champion. I should get a rematch. Put me in a triple threat match." Then they did that. Then you wouldn't have got Bret versus Austin. So it's almost never a good idea for a triple threat match. You're just wasting your time. There's no good reason why most triple threat matches happen. 4, his fourth question. What are some WrestleMania matches that you like that not many fans talk about? This is a good one. This is a good one. Uh, I liked the triple threat match. I know I just talked about that, right? But Ray, Kurt Angle, and Randy Orton. I like that they worked at a brisk pace, even though I don't like how we got to the match. I did enjoy the match itself. Um, I enjoyed Ray versus Eddie Guerrero. I know that gets a lot of people talk about that match a lot, actually. So I'm gonna change that. Orton and Undertaker. I think that match doesn't get enough credit. I think that match is underappreciated. That's one of the matches that really, really brought me back. I became a fan of Randy Orton almost immediately. He was really good. Another underrated match, I think. Hmm. Hmm. Let's go back. Let's go back. It's too much trouble for me to try to think of like modern WrestleManias because I don't really remember what happened at WrestleMania last year. I have not watched any of the modern, which means the last 6 years or something. I never go back and watch those events. I don't know why, but so most of these 2 night manias, I have never gone back and watched them. I watched them pretty much one time, maybe two. Maybe I watched one of the shows twice, like WrestleMania 38 night one. I think I maybe watched that more than once, but most of these shows I don't watch more than once. So let's go backwards. Um, let's see. Sheet. Hmm, I'm fighting it. um, WrestleMania 8, Piper and Hitman, which I think a lot of people talk about too. I think that match gets a lot of credit too. So maybe not that. It's a lot of matches that I think are underrated, but they kind of aren't. So, maybe they just don't get talked about as much as other matches. Like if you talk about the matches that are talked about most, you got Rock and Austin, the trilogy. Then you got Steamboat and Savage. They talk about that shit all the time. Undertaker and Brett, not Undertaker and Brett, but Undertaker and Shawn. Their duology. I found out today that people didn't like the Triple H Undertaker match from WrestleMania 27. I thought it was okay. I haven't seen it in a long time, so I can't tell you like it was great and they're hating. Yes, Ric Flair and Undertaker. Yes, WrestleMania 18. Absolutely. That match was fantastic. I really hate that I didn't see that match live. And I had to go. I really was so happy when I saw it because I never thought they'd work together. I didn't know wrestling. Flair was still wrestling at the time when I came back. But I was very happy to see that match and how good it was because I was shocked that Flair at his age was still able to do it. That might be it. 5. As an Undertaker fan, what are your thoughts on American Badass Taker? Do you like it or hate it? I didn't like it at first, because I'm a Dead Man fan, and by Dead Man I mean '90s Undertaker. But he didn't have the best opponents at the time. When they were doing the Monster Slayer era, and he was fighting Kamala and Yokozuna and King Kong Bundy, Giant Gonzalez. I was a kid, and that's the Undertaker I grew up with. And when the Attitude Era, he became chubby, and he was taking a whole lot of bumps for Austin and The Rock. I wasn't a fan of that. But American Badass was okay. I think I looked at it more favorable now than I did then. Obviously, I missed when he won the title back. He wasn't champion long anyway, but even when I went back and looked at it, I'm like, you know what? Big Evil was fun. It was a fun character, but I'm still more of a Dead Man fan. 6. Do you think having part-timers being the main focus in WWE storylines is ruining the product at the moment? Well, yes. I think not being able to advertise people who are central to the storylines regularly is a problem. I think that not being able to get these people, the people who are on the undercard, over to the point where people want to see them wrestle in big time matches is hurting the company. A lot of it is the way that they're presenting certain people versus the way they present others. But yes. 7. Is it just me, or does it feel like WWE isn't WWE anymore? Judging by the product, it feels so lifeless and uninteresting. The fact that the build to WrestleMania 41 feels like a build to a filler pay-per-view is very sad to see, especially with the roster they got. They aren't even trying to get him by with the hype. And this is where you miss Vince, because Vince was all like, what was something that they talked about? Vince's last WrestleMania 38, right? I know he was kind of around for 39, but he performed at 38. That was the last WrestleMania when he was in full control. One of the things that they were doing is they stupendous. He's coming up with these crazy words, this really great vocabulary, and it brought an energy to it. That's when he brought Pat McAfee in to drop the dictionary and define the word stupendous in a very entertaining way. Everything was big and energetic. That's what Vince liked. He had such energy for a guy who was in his 70s. He wanted the product to pop, to have energy, to really hype, push. Triple H thinks that this stuff is going to sell itself, like it's cocaine or something, you know? Like that's what Triple H is. Triple H is thinking like, hey, it's gonna sell itself. I'm gonna put John Cena out there as a heel. It's gonna sell itself. This easy. Like bird feed. I'm just gonna put it out there and it's gonna sell itself. It's like, no. You know, for years, Vince was a carnival barker. You know, push, push, push. You know, WrestleMania too big for one night. You know, that kind of shit. And you're like, man, it makes you feel like even if you're not excited for the card, you would get excited for how excited Vince made everybody else feel about the show. He made it feel like a big show. You know, the only thing that feels about WrestleMania this year is the fact that they're pointing at the sign. You know, even when you talk about somebody like Jey Uso, who I know a lot of the conversation about him is negative, but the fact that he's going to wrestle for the title at WrestleMania, the biggest show of the year, why is that not the conversation? Why are we not saying like this is not just the biggest show of the year, this is the biggest show of this guy's life? We should really be hyping this. There should be a level of, you should be ready. Not every WrestleMania is going to have a strong card. Like there's been plenty of weak WrestleMania cards. That's not the issue. You know, the issue is the energy. The energy level for this is terrible. Last year, it was crack and it sold itself because The Rock was wrestling. This year, they turned John Cena heel and it's not sticking. And you know, part of it is, I don't want to say it's John Cena's fault, but it's just not, has no snap to it. You know, this WrestleMania doesn't even have a tagline, if I remember correctly. Hey, what's the tagline for WrestleMania this year? Last year was WrestleMania Goes Hollywood. What's the tagline for WrestleMania this year? WrestleMania 41. What's the tagline? You know, like it got a theme. You know, you got the gambling and all that, but with the playing cards and the poker chips and all that. Okay, but there's no tagline for WrestleMania this year. So what's the hype? What are you hyping? What's the marketing and the promotion and the energy? That's what's missing. That's the secret sauce, man. That's what everybody else kept dropping the ball at. That's what Vince was so good at. You know, even if he had an extremely mid card, even if the card was terrible, he sold the sizzle then. You know, he would sell the sizzle if the steak ain't good. And then you walk away. See, Vince was so good at this, he would get people who hate WWE to watch it anyway. Like he did that for 20 years. He got people who hate the product to watch it every week, or at least to watch WrestleMania and the Royal Rumble. They complain and bitch and moan and whine, and they watch it anyway because he hype and hype and hype, and then it happened. It'd get a mixed reaction, but you remember the hype. The Orton Edge greatest wrestling match ever. You know, people still bring that shit up. Why do they bring it up? Because they remember the hype. Of course, it was never going to be the greatest wrestling match ever. It was stitched together. I think they worked like an hour and it got stitched together into like a 20 to 30-minute match that I only watched one time. But that hype, that energy, you can't beat it. That's why everybody loves like the old Royal Rumbles. And you'll hear Vince do, it's time to rumble. It's time for the Royal Rumble. And you'll see it every year. They'll play that. They'll play them joints. Hype, energy. That's the kind of stuff that is missing. Triple H ain't got it in him. He might be a little too old. You know? And the talent seemingly aren't even doing it. You know? Like, where's the energy from the talent? This is WrestleMania. Where's the energy from any of the talent? Why is there so many guys like Sami Zayn who have no match at WrestleMania and nobody cares? Remember last time there was a top star that didn't have a match at WrestleMania? There used to be guys on the mid card, guys at the bottom of the card. I ain't got no match at WrestleMania. How am I going to get on the card? You know, it would be a pervasive thing as the show got closer and closer. How can I get on the card? How can I get at the show? What can I do? It's you very rarely see that now. Most guys don't even talk about not being on shows anymore because most people don't make these shows anymore. Ever since these shows became 5-match cards, most people don't make it. So hey, look, it's the secret sauce, man. You can have literally the best wrestling matches of all time, but if nobody cares about what's happening, you know, you're going to drop the ball. You know, I don't give a fuck what Kevin Owens thinks about the product because it's a product for Kevin Owens. It's not a product for everybody else. You know, I'm not a fan of Kevin Owens. He sucks. WG Field has 2 more questions. 1, how bad could the product get for you to quit watching full time? If so, what would happen to the channel? Will you cover more policy matters? I probably would. If well, let me stop real quick. What would have to happen? I can't imagine wrestling can get worse than it was in '95, or worse than it was from 2011 to from 2009, let's say, to 2015, 2016. I can't imagine it can get worse than that. Let's say it somehow does get worse and it becomes even more drab and more boring, and I can basically speed through an interview, a review in 10 minutes or something like that, to the point where it becomes like Collision. I don't even bother watching it. For it to get that bad, there would have to be no storyline development on these shows and boring matches. At that point, there's no point in talking about it. That's what happened with Rampage. That's what happened with Collision. I stopped watching those shows because they started having pretty much out of context matches, very little character development, very little storyline development. Even today, you don't need to watch Collision to see storylines develop. So I don't watch it. So if Raw got to that point where there was very little storyline development, very little character development, or anything like that, I just stopped watching it. At that point, I would probably lean into other things. There's tons of I'm constantly reading and doing other stuff. There's wrestling books I would like to review. Like there's a lot of stuff I hold back on because I do foresee a time where I may slow down. Like that's always possible, but for right now, I'm feeling okay. You know, as long as my schedule is the same, I'm fine. You know. His second question: how cooked is WrestleMania 42? Well, since they've already hit the panic button, which is John Cena turning heel, and it's still not moving, it's still constipated, I think they're pretty well cooked. I don't think they're going to sell out either night. And I think part of this is Nick Khan going back to Las Vegas because he loves Las Vegas. Didn't they sign some kind of deal where they be going back to Las Vegas pretty regularly, right? Which is probably a mistake, but whatever. I just don't think the energy is there. Like the Europeans are fans and they don't get a lot of shows, so they're very excited to get the product when they do get it. But over here, it's very ho hum. You know, they got to do something to get things amped up over here. I'm not sure they're gonna be able to get it, so it's kind of cooked. It's pretty fucked. If we being honest. Mr. VXG says, in your opinion, what do you think there were any black wrestlers that were never world champions that should have been world champions. Well, that's a good question. I think it's hard to say who should have been because I'm not sure, if it would have worked out. But I think Booker T obviously is one that stands out as a guy who probably should have gotten there and didn't. And I think he's one of the most. I think him and Shelton Benjamin probably stand out the most as two guys who should have gotten there. But Shelton Benjamin, it was the wrong time. Vince wasn't even doing courtesy title runs at that time, man. He was establishing Cena and Batista hard. And there was nothing that Shelton Benjamin was going to be able to do that's going to dislodge either one of them. Maybe he should have main evented and wrestled them a couple of times. That would have been nice. But I don't see it. WG Phil has two more questions. Swerve is really becoming the Al Sharpton of WWE. You mean the Al Sharpton of pro wrestling? Him getting into it with Top Dollar is great. Top Dollar about to clean this fucking clock. I can't wait. And I'm not even a big fan of Top Dollar, but they're about to they're about to get into it. So it ought to be interesting. It ought to be interesting. And you could tell Top Dollar been wanting to get at this dude for a while now. It's a weird time. Swerve is a weirdo, man. I like him. He's very talented. I think he's more talented than Top Dollar. And Top Dollar has a big mouth. He talks too much. But I'm not entirely. I really don't want to take sides in that argument. I kind of want to let him talk, and then I'll see which. But Top Dollar's been consistent at the very least with how he feels about the breakup of Hit Row the first time. He's been consistent about that, and Swerve kind of has too. But it seems like Swerve always there's more to it that he just won't say. But he did say in one interview he didn't want to babysit them, and that told me right there he didn't want to be in that group at all. He didn't want nothing to do with what they were doing at all, and they had to have known that. So what we're seeing now was inevitable because I don't think they got along. They were just all put together because they were similar. That's all. They grouped up like objects. They weren't really friends. It wasn't a New Day situation where they were all friends. It was a faction that was put together by the office. Well, to be fair, Swerve was put in the group by the office. 9, Lispers Anonymous. John Cena is calling Vince about the heel turn flopping. Vince is telling him to ride it out. And Cody is eavesdropping, asking Cena, is he going to put him over? So, are we doing this? Or what's about to happen here? This is a very interesting time in my life. Young Liberty, she's about to turn 4, and she's about to watch her daddy wrestle his hero on the grandest stage of them all, in front of the entire world watching. I think this is going to be really special. But John, you got to promise me something, John. You're going to give me your best. You're going to show me the best that you could possibly be on that night. I need the real John Cena. I need the doctor of fuckonomics, John Cena. I need the greatest of all time, the greatest champion of all time. Because I need that guy to put me over. I need that guy to make me a star. That's great. Yes, Lashley should have been champion the first time, but he quit. I mean, what can you do? He quit. I think he would have gotten it eventually. I still do think he would have gotten it eventually. Is that all the questions from the queue? Yeah, that's all the questions from the queue. The M Studio says, I do like watching your archetype videos on wrestling. It made me look at wrestling very differently. Yeah, that was what I wanted to do. And I liked putting that stuff together. It just took so much time. it's a time versus reward kind of thing where people barely watch that shit, but it took me so much time to put it together. And then there were, because I was tinkering, I was writing scripts sometimes and reading scripts and all that kind of shit, and it didn't seem to go anywhere. And so I was like, you know what? It's the same thing with the library. Like I like doing the book reviews, but it seemed like people weren't really watching them, you know. And I know that's the kind of stuff that on YouTube lasts forever. Is if you do like a documentary or some shit. But I don't have that kind of I don't have that kind of time, dog. I really don't. So I may do stuff here and there, but I tried to take some of that stuff and mix it into the reviews. But then they started doing very little of the characters, and then they started moving away from the archetypes. Period. And it's kind of like, oh, what are they doing? Like when Roman Reigns seemed to have a really good arc going, and he had a nice little redemption arc going, and then they cut it off. And I'm like, huh? His redemption arc is over because he beat up Solo Sikoa? That's not enough. That's not nearly enough. But whatever. Um Najee Savage says, Mongo, have you seen the LeBron and Stephen A. Smith nonsense? You know what? I heard about it that now correct me if I'm wrong. LeBron James confronted Stephen A. Smith on the court because Stephen A. Smith was, I guess, telling the truth about LeBron James' punk ass son. And that's where the beef started, as far as I know. That Stephen A. Smith was criticizing LeBron James' son. LeBron James, who was all of like 6'8" or something like that, went over and pressed Stephen A. Smith about it. It was on camera, and then they started sniping at each other back and forth. And then they started talking about smacking each other or punching each other or whatever, which led to a really ridiculous video of Stephen A. Smith throwing an uppercut. I'm like, what the fuck kind of uppercut is that? LeBron's my age, man. He's too old for this shit. You know, like stop it. Just stop, man. Why is your son in the league if nobody can criticize him? And Stephen A. Smith is not a tough guy. So pressing him doesn't get you any points. Nobody cares, man. Like, all this is really some really dumb shit. I gotta tell you. When you beefing with look, I get it. Like ever since sports reporters became famous, it's been cool for athletes to beef with sports reporters. But you got to be professional at some point, man. It's the guy's job to cover the game. You know, he's covering the game. If your son's not good at the game, it is what it is, man. If your son's not good at the game, and I don't know if he's good or not. I never even watched the kid play. But if he ain't no good, and then everybody's gonna just come out and say he's not, like, what are they gonna do? Deny their eyes? It's a Bill Watts situation. Like everybody sees that Eric Watts is the shits. They're not supposed to say anything about it. They're not supposed to say like, oh, this kid's the shits. He sucks. He's no good. He's a David San Martino. He's a David Flair. He sucks. Get him off the court. Like, let him take his money and send him home, dog. Like, but pressing the sports reporters for that is stupid. This is ridiculous. Welcome, Byron Cutler. Welcome to the show. WG Field says, I'm starting to doubt Cena is done by December. They may actually ask him to run one more WrestleMania as a babyface because I don't think they want to have him go out with this. I don't like this. I've said it already. I keep saying it again and again. I want to like it, but I'm not liking it. The Generous Sharingan says he stopped watching in the mid 2010s. I see. 2014, 2015. Oh, absolutely. 2016 wasn't even that great. But 2014, I can't remember shit from that era, or 2015. It's hard. It's really hard. Where is LA Knight's match at? Good question. LA Knight's running around with a belt too. He ain't got no match. The M Studio says Somehow Vince, who was old and out of touch, pushed more flavor to the product than Triple H. Triple H just makes matches, and his fans think it's good, even though it isn't. Yeah, it's a really big issue, but I think a lot of it has Vince's. He's a promoter. Tony Khan's not a promoter. Uh, Triple H is not a promoter. They're bookers. You know, but Vince was everything. He was a booker. He's a writer, promoter, all that kind of stuff. And he knew that even if he got a shit card and there's a terrible match or something, like one of my favorite things that he did in his later years is he did that vignette for Baron Corbin versus Sami Zayn, and it was the match nobody asked for, that kind of stuff. It was fucking hilarious. Like that was great. To as a way of explaining heels wrestling each other. Like it was fun. You can have a fun product. Sometimes things are going to be a little too wacky. That's where Vince kind of gets overboard when he wants to cover people in slime or something like that. That's when you kind of be like, "You crazy old man, you stop it." But I would rather somebody get covered in slime or hit in the face with a pie than weeks and weeks of I don't know what. You know, Lyra Valkyria wrestling fucking Ivy Nile to, I'm like, oh my God, where's that getting us? It ain't getting us nowhere. Uh, ain't really getting us anywhere. The M Studio says, sometimes I wish we could get crazy storylines like that. That's why I enjoyed the Eddie Ray custody for Dominic storyline in 2005. Yeah, I love that. I thought that was a great angle. For starters, it's such a good angle that they're still milking it. Like AJ Francis and Chavo Guerrero was still milking that angle last week on TNA TV. Like that's how you know when you got something. Like that's what I love about this kind of stuff is when they do over the top crazy shit that sticks. And it's no way it's an inside joke that just sticks. It's not going anywhere. It's perfect. And Dominic, lived long enough to be able to play into the role, and he ended up growing a mustache like Eddie, and in the and the mullet and all that kind of stuff, starting to look like Eddie, like on purpose. Like I love that. Like it's such a fun thing to do, and you can only get that kind of stuff out of crazy, dumbass storylines. Like that stuff's fun, man. It's fun. I don't know why people got against it. Chad Allen says, Mongo, what's a wrestling gimmick character or storyline you always wanted to see done? Also love the streams. I played them on the way to work. Great. Excellent. What's a character I've always wanted to see done? Well, it's kind of pushing it, but as a fan of Daredevil, I always want to see a character kind of like that. Not blind, but like a character with like deep religious convictions and how he navigates what he does with his religious convictions. Like that's what makes Daredevil different is how Catholic the character is. The noir, the darkness that he lives in, and all that kind of stuff. Like that could be interesting. I always want to see a character like that. Where but the issue is sometimes when you do religious iconography, people get offended, they get upset. When Sean wrestled God, that was so over the top and so nuts. I couldn't do nothing but love it. It was so dumb. It was so over the top. I thought it was great. Um, but like a younger wrestler who has, is a little idealistic and maybe he starts going stark raving mad as a heel, being one of those condemning people to hell, calling them sinners and all that kind of stuff. That could be fun. It could be a fun gimmick if somebody was willing to show both sides. But most of the time if people are devout believers, they don't want to mock their religion, and you don't want an atheist to do it because they don't believe it, and so it won't be realistic. So it's probably something that can't be done. What else we got here? WWE TNA Full says, can we officially say Linda Hogan has hit the wall after that pitiful video about her dysfunctional family? If you looked at Linda Hogan, you notice that she ain't just hit the wall. She hit the broadside of a fucking castle. That woman is like 70. And she's talking about she was going to get Botox. Give it up. All right. It's over. It's over. Botox for what? You too old. You're a grandma. Stop this. Cut it out. Go away. I feel terrible that she's in that situation. I really do. I also feel bad that she said, like, her daughter doesn't speak to her. I thought that was terrible. I don't spend a lot of time with my family like I should, but I'm a big family guy. I don't want to see these families torn up. She can blame Hulk all she wants, but I'm pretty sure the reason why her daughter doesn't talk to her probably has something to do with the fact that Linda was dating guys half her age. The fact that she gets Botox at 50 and 60 years old. It probably has a lot to do with it. Probably had a lot to do with it. WG Phil says, with the Doomsday cast being the X-Men cast, MCU Fantastic Four, Thunderbolts, Captain Falcon, and most of the underwhelming MCU characters, I noticed the Marvels were omitted. Only Thor is the only one of the OG6. Well, I think they killed off pretty much everybody, didn't they? Except Doctor Strange. He's not dead yet, is he? If he's not, he's probably going to be. The Generation Sharingan says, do you think these are new WWE fanboys or basically AEW bandwagon fans from 2 to 3 years ago? I kind of feel that way. Some of them are. Some of them are, absolutely AEW fanboys who just kind of flocked over because Triple H was running things. But now they're just going right back. Again, it's fickle, So it is what it is. But I think also a lot of them were crypto fans anyway, who just got a little bit more loud because Vince was gone. So there that is. Anyway, thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it. I want to talk to you guys later. We're going to be doing, no, we did a watch along already. So next week is Thursday, April the 3rd, one day before my birthday, actually. Is that true? It is. It is. My birthday is next Friday. Or is it next Thursday? It's 7 days from today. So Friday. Next Friday. Hell yeah, brothers. I'll see you guys there.